Another day got lost. Scrolling, trying to make sense of this world that I'm in. Is a fake one, no. Wake up feeling like same old. In this series, I'll be breaking down the book of Revelation, and we'll be exploring multiple aspects to help create a clear and understandable picture of the end times. This is part 1, the introduction. It's titled Revelation Decoded, End Times Prophecy in the Age of Increased Knowledge. In this particular part, we're going to be focusing on the increased knowledge and kind of the reason behind doing all of this and where all the links will be. So throughout all the presentations, of course, this is only part 1. We're going to be looking at the whole narrative, examining each element and connecting it to historical events. We're going to be looking at today's current developments, and we're going to be linking this to the ancient biblical calendars, along with how that aligns with our current timeline, and to be able to look at what the future looks like. And all of this will be firmly rooted in Scripture. If there is any people that need to take notes, the good news is that I've got all the information, or loads of information on the slide, so you can pause it, take notes, whatever you need to do. I won't be reading the slides word for word, but we'll be able to go through certain areas and certain topics to elaborate on them. Apart from that, sit back, relax, enjoy your snacks, and all glory goes to the Most High. Let's get it. So the scriptures say, study to show thyself approved unto Yah, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. These words are both a command and a compass for all those who seek to understand the mysteries of Scripture beyond the bounds of inherited interpretation. What does this mean? This means that we have, or all have, an inherited interpretation because we listen to our pastors, our preachers, people reference the church fathers, theologians, other people that do their own research, independent researchers, and everybody has got their own interpretation of the book of Revelation. And throughout all of this, there is the singular truth, of course, but some people believe in the rapture, some people don't. Then some people believe in the millennial reign, some people don't. So there's all types of doctrines flying around. The book of Revelation has for centuries been filtered through layers of doctrine, empire, and translation. Yet Daniel foresaw a time when knowledge shall be increased and many shall run to and fro. Daniel 12, verse 4. This prophecy speaks of an era of unveiling an age when long-sealed wisdom would be opened to those prepared to discern it. Now, me personally, when I look outside, I believe we're living in that time where knowledge shall be increased, so to speak, or knowledge is increased. I mean, you just look outside, especially that verse where it says, many shall run to and fro. When you look at that, you look outside, you see the cars moving around, you see the trains and the planes. It's safe to say that we're probably living in that time where many people are running to and fro. And within this prophetic framework, the study is not to challenge Scripture itself, but to challenge our understanding of it. So we're not challenging what the word says, but we're challenging what we may have been taught, or what we, I suppose, what we've been told. Now, moving on. As I mentioned before, this study is going to be rooted in Scripture, but we're going to be looking at everything from a completely different perspective from mainstream theology. One that will remain rooted in Scripture, and more importantly will be cross-referenced with the Apocrypha and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, there is a lot of information which is so relevant to the book of Revelation, the last days, and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Apocrypha. And, we shouldn't limit ourselves to just the 66 books of the normal, what we'd call canon. And I think we really need to be opening our minds and increasing knowledge through reading other biblical texts as well. Don't be afraid to kind of open your mind a little bit. So the guiding intention is not rebellion against tradition, but obedience to the command of Christ. And a word says, watch therefore and pray always that ye may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass. Luke 21:36. And again, blessed is he that readeth and hears the words of this prophecy and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand. Revelation 1, verse 3. So, when you look at the screen, you can see all sorts. You can see the table of nations. You can see another map in this little corner here. We're not really elaborating on that today, but I'm sure we'll have plenty of time. Passover versus Easter. You've got past, present, future, and within that past, present, future, we've had different calendars. And as you can imagine, there's been so many calendars, so many changing of dates, and so many different changing of places. But yeah, the core premise of this study acknowledges that deception is not only merely touched by human morality. So from our perspective, we just think that deception is, it makes you do bad things, and that's what it is. But no, deception has penetrated into locations, times, calendars, people groups, and even the doctrines themselves. Daniel 7:25 warned that there would come one who would think to change times and laws. A lot of people say that this is going to be the Antichrist, but I think it's safe to say that throughout time, times and laws have been changed. And such manipulation of the divine order through, the alteration of sacred calendars, the redefinition of holy places, and the redirection of identity forms the backdrop of the modern religious landscape. What this basically means is we're living in a time where we've been told that these people are those people, this land is this person's land, and blah, blah, blah. This is the holy place. This is where the Battle of Armageddon is going to take place and all of that stuff. But the reality is, the scripture explicitly tells us that a lot of things are going to be moved around, and we'll dive into that more. I aim to reconstruct a clear picture of the end times, linking all the distorted truths. One thing that I don't like is leaving something that doesn't necessarily have a couple of witnesses, or something that's not clear, that can't be traced, or you can't find the information to back it up. Everything needs backup. So part of the reason why we've got 29 presentations, probably going over certain elements more than once, is because we want to make it simplistic, but at the same time we want to cover every single layer. I think I'm waffling a little bit, but let's carry on. So how are we going to do all these things that I'm talking about? First things first, of course, we're going to do what anybody would do. You're going to break down the chain of events described in the seals, the trumpets, the vials, as well as obviously the pre and post return events and timeline. Yes, there is a pre and post return event timeline. A whole bunch of stuff happened, a bunch of wars. And part of the reason why I don't want that to kind of put you off, that's not speculation. Again, all of this is going to be rooted through scripture, because a lot of the times you don't hear about what's going to happen after the Messiah returns. All we know is that it's going to be millennial reign, etc. But when you think logically, when the Messiah returns, he can't just return everyone, it's all good. There's going to be stuff that happens afterwards. You can't tell me that all the ops will be destroyed in one go. Do you know what I mean? You have to look at it from the perspective of, really, okay, Messiah returns, and then what? You know what I mean? Everyone's not going to instantly know what the kingdom is about. So there is definitely a pre and a post-return timeline. And I'll break that down very nicely for you, including linking it to our current timeline as well. And these are the patterns we're going to find to reveal an overarching prophetic structure. So with that, after breaking down the chain of events, we're going to overlay these prophetic sequences with historical realities, linking scripture to tangible world events, societal shifts, and technological developments that are happening today, of course, that echo Revelation's imagery. So that's the second layer. We're going to then layer that with reimagining biblical geography. And what that means is that we're going to have to look at the Bible geography for what it is and how it's defined in the scriptures, not what people have told us is, this is that place and this is that place. Along with examining the evolving identification of Israel, the land, but more importantly, and its people over time. And we're going to look at this rooted in scriptural definitions rather than modern cartography or political borders. So that's another layer that we're going to add to this. The other layer is that we're going to overlay all of these findings with the ancient biblical calendar, specifically or particularly the Enochian and Dead Sea Scroll calendars. Now, the Essenes used to use a sundial, and there's so much to what they did. They kept preserving the ways of the Most High, so to speak. They were the ones responsible for the Qumran scrolls. And that's something, again, that we really need to be looking at. If there's any type of scriptures or writings that have come from the Most High or his people, we need to be studying that and see if it aligns with what we're living in and what the canon says, so to speak. Gathering all this information as well, I've looked at multiple streams of research, obviously not just scriptural, but I've looked at scholarship research, people's independent research, people that create content, written, whatever. I've done a lot of research on different doctrines on the book of Revelation to try and make it make sense. And in this particular sort of instance, I could say that I've looked at a lot of the main doctrines, but there's always been a lot of differences with what preachers say. Some people will believe in the rapture, some people will not believe in the rapture, which is a big talking point. But at the same time, I don't think it's the most important part of Revelation. But yeah, there's so many different doctrines. So what we're trying to do is to synthesize a coherent, scripture-rooted framework for the end times. So what we want to make sure of is that everything fits, the timeline makes sense to what the scripture says, etc. And yeah, moving on, the renewing of the mind. So how you approach the renewing of the mind is basically you have to approach scripture as a little child. You can't go in there with any preconceived notions. You just have to look at it for what it is, and then at the same time you have to study everything that you've been looking at. More importantly, I believe that everybody has got a piece of the truth, whether it's revealed by the Most High or you've just figured it out yourself. I believe that every single person who obviously preaches or prophesies, so to speak, has got a part of the truth. As Paul wrote, we know in part and we prophesy in part. And this basically means, there's going to be certain people that will know the truth, but that guy might believe in other things that aren't necessarily part of the truth due to the theology and whatever else that they've been influenced by. But I believe that all the pieces of the puzzle are there. We just have to bring it together. Like one guy might figure out where the true location is. One guy might figure out, who the true Israelites are. One guy might be able to figure out where all the ancient battles took place. One guy might be able to figure out the calendar, the real calendar, and how it works, etc., and how it's linked into our time. And then more importantly, it doesn't matter if you're a Gentile or a Jew or whatever. I believe that, like I said, we prophesy in part, we know in part. I don't think the gifts of Yahuwah are just restricted to the Israelites. More importantly, just speaking for myself here, the Gentiles do seek wisdom. The Jews obviously normally seek a sign, which kind of tells you about the characteristics of what the people of Israel are like when it comes to the Most High, so to speak, and seeking his word. So many have sought for the identity of the man of sin or the Antichrist. From my perspective, I am also going to be doing exactly the same thing. And look, from my own sort of research as well, as much as you don't want to accuse someone, if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck. Do you know what I mean? And we can go ahead and talk about exactly who the man of sin is, but it's really important for us to build a scriptural foundation. There's been loads of doctrines about the Antichrist being a system, but the book of Daniel clearly says that it's got two eyes, it's got eyes and a mouth speaking great things. I don't necessarily think that you would be that specific if you were just talking about a kingdom, And then in approaching this study, one must set aside denominational confines and obviously read with both reverence and courage. What that means is forget about everything that you know. Not to say that everything that you know is not true, but, approach it with an open mind, and more importantly, be brave to hear some things that might not be favorable to your own understanding or the stuff that you've been taught in the past or the stuff that you actually believe. And again, study all the things I'm saying. Study to show thyself approved, right? Revelation itself calls its reader to such watchfulness. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments. Revelation 16:15. And I'm just trying to emphasize the point here. He that hath ears, let him hear. We've heard this so many times referenced in scripture as well as the book of Revelation. The goal of this research is to move beyond traditional commentary into correlation, anchoring biblical prophecy within measurable, historical, and contemporary frameworks. So we'll be looking at synchronizing or building up a tangible timeline, integrating scripture, the Apocrypha, and the Dead Sea Scrolls as three converging witnesses of a single unfolding truth. Now, this study aims not to assert absolute certainty, because, no one can turn around and say they're 100% got it. But genuinely speaking, not to try and big anyone up or anything like that, but the reality is I really do believe that there's some absolute coherence with some of this research that I'm going to present to you. And again, that might sound like a big-headed thing to say, but the reality is, again, I've looked at, when I say to you, if you believe that that's going to happen in Revelation, I've probably looked at it, and I'm trying I'm trying my best to make it make sense for everyone. Someone who's super advanced and knows the scriptures like the back of their hand to someone that's never probably indulged in studying the book of Revelation. So there's going to be many layers to this, and I really do need you to bear with me. So yeah, this will obviously show that, the word of Yahuwah harmonizes across time, culture, and revelation. And in an era marked by increased knowledge, the time that we're living in today, this work endeavors to renew the mind toward a deeper discernment of prophetic truth in obedience to the command. Seal not the sayings of this book, for the time is at hand. So, now that's all over and the spiel is done, we can look at what we're going to look at throughout these presentations. So, we've just finished off the introduction. Apologies that it might have been muffling a little bit, but I needed to let you know where I was coming from, and more importantly, how I'd like all of us to approach this when we're studying. So we've done the introduction. Part 2 is going to be Revelation, chronology, and Gentiles' deception. We're going to look at that a little bit deeper, but we're going to kind of look at the whole sort of Revelation chronology. I'm going to jump to certain conclusions, but then I'm going to prove them in later presentations. So please bear with me. 3 will be Mystery Babylon and identifying who that is, and then linking that to number 4, which is the 3-headed eagle. And it's going to make perfect sense. This second section, we'll be looking at seals and the judgment begins. So we'll be looking at the 7 seals, and then we're going to be looking at the 4th and 5th seal in much more detail. Number 7, we're going to look at the fall of Satan and the 6th seal. Number 8, we're going to be looking at the trumpets. Number 9, we're going to be looking at the 7th seal and the 144,000. You're probably wondering, why is he talking about the trumpets before? He's finished all the seals, but yeah, you'll see. Number 3, the trumpets and witnesses. This is the sort of third section. So part 10 of this will be the 3.5 days, which we'll really look at, and the 2 witnesses timeline. We're also going to look at the compelling similarities in Joel 2 and the 6th trumpet. We're then going to look at the vials, and then we're going to go into the final conflict, which is the Battle of Armageddon. And then we're going to look at Israel, the gathering, and the restoration. So that's going to be broken down in the land of Israel, looking at, that reimagining we were talking about. Then that will put into context the whole purpose and the point of the gathering. Now, I will probably mention where I think the land of Israel is at the beginning and during the presentation. I'll probably mention or allude to who the Antichrist is and all of that stuff, and probably break some of this stuff down before we get into it. But these presentations will be when I bring it all together. So again, everything that I'm saying that might sound speculative, believe me when I say I don't want to leave any room for error. So I'm going to be elaborating on everything that I've discussed later on throughout the presentation. So again, have patience. Revelation in today's world is going to be number 17, try and link it all together. And then more importantly, Antichrist timeline. We will look at the Antichrist timeline and what that looks like from when he appears, so to speak, and then right up until the Battle of Armageddon. We're also going to look at the calendars, post-return wars prophecy. So yes, we're going to look at the calendars, and we're going to break this down into what the timeline looks like, finally. And part of the reason why it's taking us so long to get to this juicy bit, and genuinely speaking, this is the juicy bit, because this is kind of where we line up and start putting dates together and stuff, which is what everybody, loves to do. But this will really back it up with everything, because we need to establish the foundation of everything that's going on in, that's led us to this sort of book of Revelation, because I think it's really important to understand the why this is all happening before we can just start going into the fun stuff. And then we're going to look at the 7,000 years of creation. So if you kind of consider why I'm so confident about these calendars, is simply because we know that there's 7,000 years of creation. We know that there's going to be 6,000 years of this world and then 7,000 years start. We also know that time was being tracked at one point. So I suppose the question becomes, when do you get to 6,000? And I suppose the answer is, does Messiah return at 6,000, or does Messiah return as the days are short? And I am jumping the gun here, but let's carry on. Number 21 is 35-year war of light. That's in the War Scrolls, and that's something that we're going to look at in depth. And then we're going to look at the final age, bring it all together, final age timeline. We're also going to look at Satan's imprisonment, because I think it's really important to understand Satan's role, even pre and post return. And then We're going to look at, I'm just stretching, we're going to look at Revelation, calendar of the end times, linking it all to the book of Revelation. And we're going to keep going over the timeline over and over again. But every time we go over the timeline, it's going to add more, add more, add more. And one thing I really want to highlight as well about the book of Revelation is not every single chapter is written chronologically. Some chapters emphasize on certain elements, whether it's a seal or a trumpet. And, you know, when you really start to break it down, you can find other verses, other scriptures that will expand on the event that's happening on that seal or that trumpet. For example, the book of, again, I'm jumping the gun, the book of Jeremiah talking about the destruction of Babylon, which we know it happens in the book of Revelation. But anyway, after that, just to finish off, because we're studying primarily the book of Revelation, we're going to be looking at number 25, the 7 churches. Really, really important, because after we've looked at everything, put everything into context, you know, 7 churches, is it just Asia? And these churches in Asia, I don't personally think so. So this is a really, really deep study here. And we look at the 7 churches in more detail. We'll then look at the Nicolaitans, which will make sense with the 7 churches. We'll look at this really, really strong term, Holocaust over the earth, from the Essene book of Revelation, and break down how that looks and how that links with the book of Revelation. We can look at the little book that's eaten by John. And then last but not least, we are going to have the completion of the Revelation cycle, again going over that timeline if it's not clear at that point already. All right, so that's pretty much part 1 done. Wasn't expecting it to be this long, but at the same time, this is the reason why I've broken down all the presentations into 29 parts, because I really do not know how long I'm going to be speaking for. So yeah, stick with me, guys. Like I said, grab some snacks. And yeah, I'm really hoping that you can study this over the course of a few days, few weeks, whatever it takes. Please do study everything that I talk about. Be blessed, and then we're going to be in part 2 very, very soon. And part 2 is going to be looking at Revelation chronology and the Gentiles' deception. Catch up soon.